Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight on the Tripart Care Emotional Wellbeing Hub for March 2022. I'm Dr. T. Ayodele Ajay, and I'm your facilitator and host for tonight. And also with me, co-hosting with me is my soon-to-be medic, Olufunsho Sholadoye, Jemima Sholadoye, who has been my co-host for a few of these sessions. So I'm really delighted that you are all here, and we are just going to get the show going. Let me just share my slides, and then we will make a start. Right. Okay. So this is what we are doing tonight. We all know that. We all know why we are here. It's suicide prevention, and it's a corporate community approach. We all know that one of the things that is paramount on my heart to pass across this evening is that suicide prevention is everyone's business. And I'm hoping that by the time we finish tonight, that we will all feel enabled in some way to be able to contribute to the collaborative effort to actually help us to prevent suicide in the community, whichever community you belong to. I'm hoping that by the end of the session tonight, you'll feel more enabled to be able to actually make a change. So I'm just going to go through some housekeeping rules, and then I'm going to start by going on to the disclaimer. So basically, this event is for informational purposes, and I've done my due diligence to try and make sure that every information is accurate and that information is up to date as well. However, this by no means is not a personal consultation, and it's not meant to replace a personal consultation. So for that reason, every decision made regarding your personal health care should please be made in conjunction and in cooperation and in consultation with your own personal health care provider or your physician or your general practitioner or professional, as the case might be. And also, I also wanted to say that this event is being recorded and will be put on a few of our media platforms, particularly our YouTube channel, the Tripart Care YouTube channel. Please do be aware of that. And should anyone not feel comfortable with being recorded, please then you could, for instance, anonymize yourself and also not show your face on the in the camera. So that's just that about the disclaimer. But I'm also comfortable that I usually say, after I've done the disclaimer, I usually say that I'm also comfortable that I'm in the midst of friends. So I have nothing to worry about. Right. Okay. We've got quite a bit to do today. So welcome, everyone is welcome. And I want to say that I would like to have a feel of who is in the room. So if you could please just write in the chat, I'd like to know first. I'm going to introduce myself in more details in a moment, but I'd like to have a feel of who is in the room. So first, I'd like to know where you are from. So please type in the chat whichever place you are from in terms of your city or your country. I'm quite pleased that some people are joining us from abroad. I can see that my medical school classmate, whom both of us end up becoming shrinks, is a professor of psychiatry at the University of Jos, Professor Taiwo Bindo, is online with us today. So I would just like to know where people are from and what your background is. Are you a clergy leader? Are you a faith leader? Are you a manager? Okay, Cambridge. Laurel from Maryland. Ooh. Thank you for joining us. Glasgow, Essex, Cambridge, London, okay, UK, Essex, okay, good. Grace, okay, all right. That's my little sis from Texas. Okay, Right. I can see we've got quite a bit of people from really, okay, Kent, Lola from Kent. Right. Dunstable, okay, social worker, Portsmouth. Okay, Sierra Leone. Ooh, Rugi used to be my colleague. Thank you, Rugi, for joining us, Texas. Okay, that's my little sister. Okay, Dartford. Okay, so please keep them coming. Right, please keep them coming. Right, okay, London. And we've got a pharmacist in mental health. Okay, right. Okay, so now just a bit about myself. And the reason I'm saying that is because I want to put up my answer. This is not the part of the presentation that I enjoy doing, but I've got to do it because I'm sure there are people in the room who don't know me. You've just seen this poster. Somebody has sent you the poster, and you're wondering who is this guy who is this guy who wants to talk about suicide, who is taking on the theme of suicide prevention. So my name is Dr. T. Ayodele Ajay. I'm a consultant psychiatrist, and I work in the NHS or in the UK. And I've got, I feel privileged that I've got about 23 years of psychiatric experience under my belt. But also I'm a fellow of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, which is something that I really deem to be a very high honor. In addition to that, I play a number of roles in my organization. I'm a clinical lead in terms of being a service lead in my region. And I'm also responsible for delivery and the quality of the psychiatry teaching that we deliver to a number of medical schools. That's in my region, the King's College Medical School, as well as also Kent and Medway Medical School, which will be joining us from next year. Also, outside of the NHS, I wear a number of hats. I do sit on a few charities in the UK. And in addition to that, I chair, I actually feel privileged that I'm able to chair a couple of the charities. In addition to that, as you know, Tripart Care Emotional Wellbeing Hub is something is a project that was birthed or that was given birth to from the lockdown. Over the lockdown, a number of people in the community actually started reaching out to me, expressing concern about members in their people, maybe members of their family or members of the community or members of their churches or their faith organizations that were actually experiencing mental distress and mental difficulties. And so over time, I was involved in these calls. I was getting involved in Zoom calls. And over time, it became apparent that we actually need to have something consistently in place to actually support our community. So the Tripart Care Emotional Wellbeing Hub is still very focused on our young adults, but the reality is that over time, I can see that this has evolved. I can see that when we started that first meeting in June 2021, quite a lot of adults reached out to me, middle-aged people or people who are older adults actually reached out to me and said, you are being ageist here. Why are you being exclusive for young adults? Why don't you include us? And some of them came along anyway. So I think it's the more the merrier. But the reality is still that the hub, the people I'm really passionate about are young adults, and I'm hoping that we can meet their needs and address their concerns. In addition to that, in addition to some of the things I do, the Tripart Care Hub, I also do run a mentoring organization for young people who want to go into medical school. It's called Mentor into Medicine, and we've been running that since 2013. We support young people from disadvantaged backgrounds in terms of whether they are socially or ethnically disadvantaged and unlikely to get into medical school. And we provide hands-on support, interview skills training, supporting them with reviewing them, critiquing their personal statements, signposting them to resources, and just being there for moral support and giving mentoring help so that their dreams can be achieved. And I'm quite pleased to share that this year we've had, like other years, but particularly this year, we've had very many offers from those who've gone through our program or those who've joined the interview skills training. And that's something I'm really excited about, that there are people who can then come back and pay back into the system. So I think that's about all. And of course, the fact that people do know this, that I'm also a member of the pastoral team of my church, and that my portfolio is actually for young people. So if you see me going on and on about young people, it's because that's my portfolio, and those are the people that I really am passionate about. And that's not been the gist. So, right. Okay, so the tripart care model. I'm also a member of the spiritual special interest group of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. For some of us, we don't know that the Royal College of Psychiatrists actually has a special interest group, and a special interest group for the Royal College of Psychiatrists is actually a place where we discuss beyond what are the spiritual aspects of psychiatry, the spiritual aspect of human beings. And one of the things that I found out from being a member of that group is that the Royal College of Psychiatrists conducted a survey a while back, and it actually showed that about 1 in 2 of the patients that we see in psychiatry or that have mental difficulties actually express the fact that they have mental spiritual needs, and that their psychiatrists are not equipped to meet those needs. And that really the Royal College is now encouraging us as psychiatrists to begin to be aware that our patients are not just people with physical needs or emotional needs, that they also have spiritual needs, and they actually expect that at least their psychiatrists are aware. So the tripart care model is the one that actually looks at mental well-being from a very holistic, I call it a biopsychosocial spiritual dimension. So we are looking at the physical dimension of mental well-being. We are looking at the emotional dimension. We are looking at the psychological dimension. But we're also looking at social, but also spiritual dimension. So, and like I said, my faith, I'm a Christian, and that's the model that I use. And it's important for us to know that the tripart care model actually has a spiritual dimension to it, and really psychiatry is now at a place where we are saying that that's something really very important currently. So, right. So I want to say that suicide is a very difficult topic to talk about at the best of times. And the reality is that, like I said in the advert, 23 years on, I still find it challenging every time a suicide happens. It's very complex and it's distressing. So I'm going to first encourage us that if there is anyone who finds this distressing, some of the content I might share might bring some memories or open some can for you. If that's the case, I'll encourage you to please get help. You could, if you wanted to stay behind, you could or send me an inbox or something, or there are other resources that I'm going to share at the end of the resources that I'm going to share, like the Samaritans, like places where you can actually get practical support in speaking to somebody. But I just wanted to let everyone know that please do be aware that some of the information might be distressing in terms of suicide, and that if that's the case, please don't. We want you to be supported. We don't want you to go feeling unsupported. We really want you to get the help that you need. So please don't suffer in silence. So when I was training because I did some formal training as in medical education. One of the things I didn't mention is that also I'm still on the books of the Health Education England as a clinical skills facilitator, clinical skills group facilitator. And one of the things that I was taught in starting my medical education career was that a good teacher tells you ahead of time what they're going to tell you. They go ahead to tell you what they're going to tell you. And after they've told you what they're going to tell you, they then go ahead to tell you what they've told you. So basically, that's also the theory of learning, isn't it? Consolidation. And so in that line, I want to be a good student. I'm going to start by telling you what I'm about to tell you. And I'm going to then go ahead to tell you, and hopefully we'll see how it goes. Maybe during the questions and answers, I'll be able to tell you what I've told you. So we are going to talk about suicide, the myths. What are the erroneous things that people feel about, the erroneous views that people have about suicide that's actually preventing us from being able to maximize suicide prevention programs. I'm going to tell you about the maths, the statistics of suicide, and the medicine. The medicine of suicide is actually what is it that is proven to work in suicide prevention? Because the reality is research actually shows us that there are 4 different things, 4 different strategies or approaches that work in suicide prevention. And those are the things that I want us to talk about tonight. So what else? I'm going to talk to us about how to support people who are suicidal or in distress. The reality is that maybe we should stop waiting until people get suicidal. Maybe from the point of distress, we should be actually more proactive in terms of supporting people before they even get to the point in which they become suicidal. I'm also going to share an infographic that I've done in that regard. It's a material that belongs to Tripart Care, which can help you to look at yourself and see what are the things that I can do as an individual to support the people who are in distress in my life, or to even recognize and to be equipped to support them. I'm also going to show a video by the International Association of International Suicide Prevention Association. What can we do to create and cultivate supportive organization cultures? What can we do in an organizations to actually make things happen, to move the dial in favor of preventing suicide in our communities? And then we are going to look at corporate, charity, church, faith, suicide prevention strategies, and how we can actually support you doing that. And then, very importantly, looking at suicide prevention resources, because believe you me, there are several resources out there. In fact, there are several resources out there that people can actually resort to. And I'm going to talk about the next steps in terms of what are the next titles we are going to be dealing with, and what can you expect from Tripart Care going forward. So the suicide myths. The first myth that I want to address is that people think that, or the community, when I come across in the community, the general myth or the general concept, the idea is that suicide is not preventable. There is nothing further from the truth than that. Suicide can be prevented. It's possible to be able to do our bit. It's possible to actually be able to contribute to that space. When we put up our hands and we say, oh, suicide it's not preventable anyway, we're approaching the issue from a defeated point of view. We're approaching the issue from a place where we then become, we are shooting ourselves as a community on the back foot. But the reality is that research does show that there are things that are proven, there are proven efforts, there are proven strategies that actually help us to impact, to dent the numbers of people who take their lives by dying from suicide. For instance, a very typical one, just to say this, is that when in the UK there was legislation made to prevent the number of paracetamol that people could buy at one purchase. When the legislation backed up, there was new legislation backing up the fact that you couldn't get more than one sachet of paracetamol containing more than 16 tablets. Believe it or not, the death by paracetamol poisoning was remarkably reduced. In fact, what happened was, up until that point, paracetamol poisoning in the UK was the top of the list of those who died from overdoses. Paracetamol poisoning was sitting on top of that on that scale in terms of the type of poison that people use in taking their lives. But at that point, after the legislation, that actually changed. That's to let you know that some small things can actually create big impact. So if there's one thing I would like you to take home from today, is that suicide can be prevented. It's possible to actually do a bit. It's possible to do something to create, to contribute into that space, and to actually help to prevent the incidents. The other myth that we also deal with is that suicide prevention is exclusively for mental health professionals. I'm going to show you a video from the International Association for Suicide Prevention, and you are going to hear the message loud and clear from them as well, that really suicide prevention is everyone's business. And sometimes when we write things down, sometimes when we say things, it actually registers, because sometimes we pay lip service to things, but it doesn't really resonate, or it doesn't really, we say them, but we are not agreeing with them. So I'm going to ask that you please type in the chat that suicide prevention is everyone's business. Suicide prevention is actually everyone's business, and that includes yourself and myself. We all have a role to play. We are all influencers, whether everyone is an influencer, because whether you might be influencing, please let's mute ourselves so that everybody can have a very interesting experience. So please mute yourself, except you are the one talking. So like I said, please let's type in the chat that suicide prevention is everyone's business. And those are my key messages to you today, that suicide prevention, you have a role to play, I have a role to play. And that's what today is all about. That's what tonight is all about, that we all have a role to play in preventing suicide in every community that we belong to. And the reality is that everyone is an influencer. You are an influencer because you influence yourself. Because at the point of seeing somebody who is distressed, or maybe just having a clue, or just having an hint that maybe this person is distressed, you are influencing yourself when you decide to speak to them or not to speak to them. And I'm hoping that from today, we'll be able to feel equipped enough and confident enough to be actually be able to have those conversations, which can be life-saving. So suicide prevention is everyone's business, and it's not just the impact of, it's not just exclusive to mental professionals. And the other thing that is not exclusive to is that suicide prevention is it's a collaborative effort. So it's not just about you working in silos and I working in silos, but us coming together and joining efforts. And that's why when I asked what was the background, or the background that people were coming from today, people who have joined this meeting, that was what I was driving at. I wanted to see the mixture in the room. I wanted to see the diversity in the room. I wanted to see the different places where we come from, because we need to all pull resources together. Some of us are leaders of charity. Some of us are business leaders. Some of us are mental leaders. Some of us are members of our community. Every one of us needs to approach suicide in a collaborative way and bring to the table something that we've got, because every one of us has got something to bring to the table in preventing suicide in our communities. Right. So the other thing is that the other myth that we come across very commonly is that asking about suicide, that people think that if you ask somebody about suicide, you might give them the idea. The reality is that that will not be furthest from the truth. The fact that you see somebody in distress, or you begin to have an inkling that they may actually be suicidal or in mental distress, does not by any means mean that you can introduce the thought into their minds. Because sometimes you hear people who say, and genuinely, because you don't want to compound people, you don't want to make things worse. So sometimes you hear people who say, oh, yes, I don't know whether if I ask, maybe I would actually then give the idea to the person. The reality is that no, asking could actually be a lifesaver, but not asking could then be tragic. So never think that asking somebody will sow the ideas in their minds. It doesn't. And then the other myth I want to address this evening is that suicide attempt is an attention-seeking act. Please, let's never think like that. When we think like that, we're actually damage. We're inflicting damage on our communities. That idea, that sort of thinking, that sort of mindset is actually very damaging to the well-being and to the welfare of our society and our community. Because the reality is that statistics show that the greatest predictor, and I want to say that again, I want to say that because sometimes I say things with emphasis because I want it to ring, I want it to stay, I want it to be remembered. The greatest predictor, the number one predictor of successful suicide, that's of completed suicide, I don't want to say successful suicide, but completed suicide, is a previous attempt. It's a previous attempt. So really, let's never. It's not in my place to. I can't get. despite the fact that I've been 23 years practicing, I can't get into somebody's head and say, "Oh, yes, that was just a cry for help." How do I know? And when I assume that position, then it makes me less able to help the person. It makes me less able to get into the space where they are in, where I can speak from one human to the other and actually help them to move along. So let's take, what I'm saying is take every hint seriously. Take every hint seriously and act on them. Act on them like it's true, because it's true until proven otherwise. And that's the really place, this is the place, this is the place to really be. Thank you, Dr. Alao, for that. Suicide is preventable. We can take the bold step to prevent it. Thank you for that. So every suicide death was, the other myth I want to address is this, that every suicide death took place in somebody who has a mental illness. That is not necessarily true. That's not the case, because we do know that, yes, a great percentage of people a sizable percentage of people who die from suicide have a recognizable mental illness. But we also do know that a lot of people actually have mental distress. It's the pressures of life, it's the stress of life, it's the stress of unemployment, it's the stress of broken relationships, it's the stress of being without housing, it's the stress of loneliness. I'm hoping that we're going to come to that. Just whilst we're on it now, the theme for the Mental Health Awareness Week in the UK for this year is loneliness, and rightly so. I mean, rightly so, because we've just come out of the lockdown for the third time or the fourth time now, and loneliness, that impact that loneliness has had and how damaging it can be on mental well-being. So let's not forget that really. So it's not necessarily the case that somebody who's died from suicide has had a mental has had a mental diagnosis. There are several people who take their life just because they're overwhelmed and they feel trapped by life, and they feel that their problems are insolvable and insurmountable, and they resort to taking their lives as a result. And it's just because at that time help was not available. There was nothing to compare their current script and narrative with. There was nothing to give a different view about what could be happening or what could happen. Somebody said that suicide is a long-term approach to a short-term problem. And it's also a tragic approach. I think it's a tragic approach because every time, putting it in perspective, every suicide is not a statistic in the National Confidential Inquiry into Suicide. No, it's somebody, it's a parent, it's a dad, a mom, a brother, a sister, an auntie, an uncle, a work colleague, a manager, somebody who works, an employee, somebody is a church leader, somebody is a leader, somebody who is a business owner. Those are the people. When we think about it that way, I think it helps us to develop a different perspective. So, and the other point I want to make, which is not on the slide, which is also a myth, is that people who die by suicide is because they can't pull themselves together. It's because they are not resilient. It's because they are not they can't bring it all together. It's because they are not weak. And it's because they are weak, because they're emotionally weak. That will not be furthest from the truth as well. We do know that that's not the case. We do know that at the point when people take their lives, at that point, there is already, their thinking is altered in such a way that it's difficult for them to see any way out. And the only way out they can see is to die by suicide. And when that happens, it's not because they are weak, it's not because they are not strong, it's just because they're at a point in which they are not able to consider any other options, and they are in the gridlock, and they feel locked in, and they feel trapped. So it's important for us not to see suicide as a weakness. It is very important to remember that. And just whilst we're on that, I want to talk about the fact that or maybe when we get to the statistics, I would actually make a reference to that in terms of toxic masculinity, which I think it's something that will be important to talk about today. Right. I'm just going to. Okay. So what's the maths? What's the statistics regarding suicide? What do we know about the maths or the statistics? Every year, every single year, this is not for 25 years or 10 years or 23 years, every single year, about approximately 703,000 people globally die by suicide. That's every single year. We're not talking here about, we're talking about every annually. So in 3 years, that's about 2.1 million in 3 years. Just to put things in perspective, every 40 seconds, somebody dies by suicide, and 1.3% of all the deaths that occur globally, 1 out of every 100 deaths that occur globally is from suicide. That's the nature of what we are talking about this evening, because I think that helps to put it in perspective. That indeed, that's the gravity of the gravity of suicide. Yes, suicide can be seen as a choice, and in 1961, Suicidal Act removed it as an unlawful act. Yes, thank you, Dr. Seth. Dr. Seth is one of my mentors. He was one of those who trained me in psychiatry. So thank you for joining us and making that very important point. Yes, indeed. And that's why very carefully you would have seen that I'm very consciously using the word die by suicide. But die by suicide, I'm very consciously avoiding using committing suicide, because people don't commit, you commit an offense. And that's one of the other things that we can really pay attention to in the use of our language, so that we remove the stigma that is associated with mental health problems. When people say somebody committed suicide, we're actually putting the guilt of the suicide on them. We are making them responsible for it. But suicide has been decriminalized in the UK, like it's been said by Dr. Seth now in 1961. So that's also something to bear in mind. 20 million people, 20 million annual attempts globally. 20 million people who attempt. So not necessarily million people, because that's 20 million attempts, because it means that you have people who, for instance, will attempt more than once or twice. So, and that's every year. And the point I want to make again is that males more than females. So in the UK, for instance, the statistics we've got in the UK is that 3 out of every 4 suicide occurs in men. 3 out of every 4. So 75% of everyone who takes their life in the UK is by suicide. And globally, we also do know that globally, men are twice more likely to die by suicide than women are. So whichever way, it's still the spotlight is on the men here, and that's not been chauvinistic or anything. I'm just saying that we need to look at our the men in our community. And the other reason why I'm saying that is not to downplay suicide that occurs in women. I'm not by any means doing that, because every life, I think, is precious, whether one is a man or a woman. I'm just saying what the statistics shows. And the other thing I wanted to tell us, now that we're on the issue of the male-female ratio, is the fact that there's something called toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity is when being a man, being a male, because belonging to the male gender actually becomes toxic to the person. And it's based on the mindset that men are not meant to show emotions, that men are not meant to ask for help, and that men should have it together all of the time. And that if you show any mental distress, any form of need for support, then you are weak. And when we listen to that, I think it's very easy for us to then join the dots and see why one of the high on the list of those who die by suicide are middle-aged men. Because really, when we think about it, just try and profile what I've just said. Think about it, and maybe you can even think about people in your life that may fall into that profile. I'm not meant to ask for help. Men must not show emotions. Men don't cry. You know, those type of slogans. Men don't cry. Pull up your socks, roll up your socks, pull yourself together, that sort of thing. When we think about it, we actually find out that those things are toxic. They've been related to not seeking mental health help, and they've also been linked to aggression and violence, but also to suicide. So the message I'm putting that out there, as a member of the clan, as a middle-aged man myself, the message I'm putting out there very, very clearly tonight, without any reservation and boldly, is that please ask for help, men. If you have mental difficulties or you're in distress, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay not to be okay. It's okay to put up one's hands and say that I need help. And that by no means is a sign of weakness. And it's not by any means a reflection that you are not able to act your life together, because everyone needs help sometime in their lives. And I do hope that that message comes out very, very clear and that it's well received, because it's coming from a member of the clan. I really do honestly hope that comes across. So that's 125 suicides in a week. That's in the United Kingdom. And very important, 1 out of 5 suicidal thoughts, 1 out of 5 people actually admit that in the lifetime would have experienced suicidal thoughts. And that tells you how, it also shows how common it is. Yeah. So somebody said, I'd like to know how mental illness is linked with suicide and how more the church can do. Okay, yes, that's something we are going to get to. Thanks. That's a very relevant question. Yes, just to address that question now, we do know that I think there was a study that was carried out in Europe, over here in Europe, and showed that when they looked at people who had died by suicide, at least 50% of them had also had a diagnosis of depression. So depression is one of the top diagnoses that features in mental illness, in suicide. But in addition, we also do know that when discharge from hospital within the first week of discharge carries a high risk of suicide, and that also discharge from hospital within the first month of discharge from hospital are high risk periods for people with mental illnesses. And of course, the other stats in terms of people who are socially isolated, people who are living alone, all of those we are going to come to in a short while. But importantly, the point about what can the church do, that's very relevant. That's one of the reasons why we are here today. And I do hope that we will get there. So what are the risk factors? It looks like my colleague, Dr. Adegore, preempted that. Yes, indeed. What can the church do? So let's look at the suicide risk factors. Previous suicide attempt, like I said, is top on it's right on top of that scale. If somebody's made an attempt before, take them seriously, and don't say, oh, it's just attention seeking, because we do know that about 1% of those who had attempted self-harm or attempted, who self-harm will then die by suicide within a year. So we know that it's more males than females, but I want to emphasize again that this is by no means an attempt to downplay suicide by women, because it's just that we are saying that men are more at risk, but it doesn't mean that women are not at risk. 58% of those who die by suicide globally are under the age of 50. Also something to make us reflect on. And in fact, it's now a leading cause of death in those who are under 25 as well, which is making us look, which also calls an attention to us for those who are probably middle-aged people or who are leaders in any sphere of society in this room today, what are you doing with the young people under your care? Whether they are directly under your care or remotely under your care, what plans have you got in place to look out for them? I work with with young people a great deal, and that's both young people in terms of teenagers via church, but also young adults in the community via work. Somehow, I think that for some reason, it looks like one way or the other, I get to encounter young people a lot. And the reality is that a lot of them are going through quite a lot of challenges. And many times the things that I hear from them is that sometimes they feel that middle-aged people are disengaged and disconnected, that there's a generational gap. So one of the things that the church can do, just talking about it now, and also any organization can do, is to try and bridge that generational gap. And one of the most powerful things that we can do is listening. Listening to these young people, listening to the young adults, getting them together in a room and saying, this time we are not going to do the talking. One of the most successful Zoom sessions I participated in during the lockdown was one in which a young lady who runs a very successful family support charity, Climax, Kemi Tomide Johnson, hosted an event in which it was a role reversal. It was the adults in the room who were sitting down and listening to the young people tell them about what we need to be paying attention to in order to support them with their mental health challenges and their mental well-being. That's one of the things that church can do to really have where the adults are here. We are here to learn. We are here to listen and to take notes, and not just take notes, to actually carry those things forward and translate them into strategies that would then be broken down into plans that would then actually be translated into actionable and reviewable action plans. So that's just for that. So in terms of, we also do know family history of suicide. If somebody's got a family history of suicide, they are at higher risk. And the other thing we also do know, because I do know we've got a global audience here, is that 3 in 4 of those who die by suicide globally in the last few years have been in low-income and middle-income countries. But that's not to say that high-income countries are exempted. It's just that when you have a global view, and I think I think that's a challenge to us, those who live in high-income countries, to think about what support can we give. When you support that little project in India, in the remote village of India, when you support that little project in the remote village of Africa, it might be £5 to you, it might be $3 to you, or $10 every month that you send. But that might actually be part of your contribution towards suicide prevention. It might feel far-fetched, but that's the reality of it. Okay, right. So that psychosocial stressors is something else. Mental difficulties, like I said, mental conditions. If somebody is depressed, for instance, they have a 20-fold increase of dying by suicide than somebody who doesn't have depression. And people ask me often, what can I do? What's the quickest thing? What's the quick win? There's no quick win, but if one was to think about what are the things that I can do to upskill myself relatively quickly, one of them is to learn about depression. And I'm pleased to say that the next, in April, at the end of April, the next Emotional Wellbeing Hub, we are going to be looking at depression, the facts, the fiction, and the fixes. Because after suicide, I think the next thing is depression. So one of the things to do, if you really are very keen to upskill yourself very quickly, is to look at what does depression look like in the community. Chronic pain and illnesses, there are risk factors, living alone, like I said, poverty. In the UK, for instance, we do also know that people, if somebody is male and they are poor and they're from a Black ethnic minority background, that they're also at higher risk. Alcohol and substance misuse, all of those are risk factors. Okay, so the next question now is, what can we do in terms of what works. So medicine, suicide medicine, in the actual sense, that's just for alliteration, because it's not medicine in the real sense of it, but what works. And this is from the International Association of Suicide Prevention, like I said. The first thing I want to say is that evidence-based suicide prevention methods exist. So we're not just talking fables or plucking things from our heads. In actual sense, we do know that there are things that have been demonstrated from research to actually change outcomes for people who are dealing for the statistics in our communities. So community support to combat loneliness. And that cannot be overestimated. It cannot be overemphasized. I think that in our modern world, 21st century living, we've become more and more isolated. We are more technically connected, but more emotionally isolated. Because the fact that you are connected to people on social media does not mean that you are emotionally connected to them. And I want to say that again, that we are more connected in terms of techie-wise, but also more emotionally disconnected. Because it's not just about it, it's actually having a rapport, it's actually building relationship, it's building a trusting relationship, and it's combating loneliness. Because the reality is that when people, at the time somebody dies of suicide, it's a very lonely place. They've concluded that the only way out is death, and that they will make that happen. And they are not able to have the benefits of a different narrative. So loneliness, it's a very, very powerful thing, and it's a very powerful contributor. And community support. And just whilst you are here, I want you to think tonight about what can you do to really combat loneliness in the areas and the sphere of your influence. Who is it that you can reach out to? What can you do in your organization to actually combat loneliness? What can you do in your church? What can you do in your faith group? What can you do in the place where you have jurisdiction over to actually combat loneliness? So responsible and sensitive media portrayal of suicide, responsible and sensitive media portrayal of suicide. That's the second strategy that's been proven by research that works. So the media, and I want us to have a very flexible idea or view or recognition of media today, because every one of us is now in the media. The reality is that there's research that shows that on the average, each person has about 7.6 social media accounts, and it's social media. So I don't want us to forget the media part of it. So we are all in the media these days. We all have a power. We all have a power to influence society, and so we all have a power to actually influence media now. I know we are talking about mainstream media here, but we are also media people now. And the way we actually portray the messages that we put on media, on social media, can be powerful. We do know that, but it's also about the mainstream media. And one of the things, for instance, that I'm doing in that territory is that I write a mental health column in one of the London community newspapers monthly. And that's deliberate, it's intentional. That's a platform that I'm using to put out mental health education in a way that is understandable, in a way that is bite-sized, in a way that is digestible to our community. And I challenge you to do the same, to begin to use your platform, no matter how big or how little it is, media platform, to actually influence the type of language we use. For instance, committing suicide is one of the things that you can stop saying today, that people die by suicide, they don't commit suicide. One of the other things that media can do is to begin to talk about success stories. When I'm on LinkedIn and I hear about success story of people who have overcome mental difficulties, or they have by any means gone through very difficult times, and they are now paying it forward and influencing society, I ask to follow them. And that's also intentional, because I want to listen to their story. I want to see what wisdom can we glean from their lives to actually pay that forward. So whatever way, many times we underestimate our abilities to influence, to be influencers. So I want you to think tonight, in what way can you influence the media? What can you start doing in your own little corner to actually contribute to the way that mental illness and particularly suicide is seen and portrayed by the media? So we've got community support to combat loneliness, and that includes just really reaching out to your neighbor next door, reaching out to the elderly lady, reaching out to the young man who's just moved into the area, or just immigrated into from a different country, and they feel lost. They feel like they don't know anybody, and they're just floating. What can you do to support them? What can you do to go out of your way and break that silo that you're in to really reach out? Local education to create community awareness. That's what we are doing today, and that's what Tripart Care is about. Really educating ourselves. Like I said, the place to start, for instance, we are getting knowledge about suicide tonight. We can also begin to think about, for instance, depression and the other conditions. Also in the introduction, I missed out the fact that Tripart Care actually runs a YouTube channel, and it's the same name, Tripart Care. And it's a YouTube channel. There are currently about 40 videos or so on that channel, about, I think, a little under 40 videos on the channel. And it looks at different aspects of mental health, and particularly through the lens of culture and through the lens of faith as well, of the Christian faith. So please do avail yourself of those videos. Local education to create community awareness. And just answering the question again, because I think it's easier to address the questions as soon as one of the questions that was raised was, what can the church do? That's one of the things that church can do. Church can actually, and that's not limited to church alone, it's also business organizations, it's also faith groups. You can actually begin to educate your leaders. You can begin to educate the members of your community about mental health problems, where everybody is coming to speed with the fact that to gain basic knowledge about mental difficulties. Because one of the problems is that a lot of people don't want to touch mental health difficulties or mental health with a badge pole because they are worried that I don't know enough. And the way to know enough is to begin to get knowledge, to feel that we're actually in a place where we can help. Restricting means of suicide to stop suicidal act at critical times. That's the last intervention that is known to work. Restricting means of suicide. So if you ever come across somebody who is in suicidal crisis and they've told you, for instance, that because people who are in suicidal crisis are usually, if you dig deep and you engage with them in a trusting conversation, many of them will actually disclose to you what's on their mind. It's interesting. They will actually tell you, the way I'm going to do it is by taking overdoses. And one of the things you can do is to then take their medication away. It looks like a very simple process. It looks like it's a little effort, but it can yield very heavy dividends. So taking the medication away will be one of the ways to do that. So those are the things that we know that work. One, community support to combat loneliness, responsible, sensitive media portrayal of suicide, local education to create community awareness, and restricting means of suicide to stop suicidal acts at critical moments. And collaboration is key to effectiveness. Collaboration is key to effectiveness. That's one cannot overemphasize that collaboration is very it's really key to the effectiveness of all this. So now let's go on to look at, I'm just going to show a video. I'm going to stop sharing for one moment. I'm going to show a video, and it's by the International Association of Suicide Prevention. So I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, good. Right, we've got it now. So it's a 1-minute video.
What's in a smile? A simple smile can
everybody hear that?
Yes, we can.
All right, brilliant, good.
be little to you or I, but to someone thinking about suicide, it can be the first step towards life. Suicidal thoughts are complex. No one knows exactly what works to stop another tragedy, adding to the 800,000 suicides and 20 million attempted suicides a year. We do know, though, that certain actions can make a difference. And we know that if we put a wide range of these actions in place, we have a better chance of preventing suicides. Community support to counter the isolation so often felt. Responsible and sensitive media portrayals to help people see how others have managed. Local education to create awareness in the community. Restricting the means of suicide to stop people at critical moments. All these actions have been shown through research to work. But we can't do all this alone. We need people on the ground to help us make the first step towards those with suicidal thoughts. By stepping closer, we can be aware of those around us who need help. By stepping closer, we can encourage those with suicidal thoughts to reach out. By stepping closer, we can support those in need by sitting in their pain. Every step closer can connect someone to life and the help they want. Sometimes those steps are big. Sometimes all it takes is a smile.
Okay, so I'm quite keen to hear our thoughts. Please just type them in the chat. What resonated with you in that video? For me, what resonated with me is that it doesn't have to be huge steps. That small steps can actually make big impacts. That's what really resonated with me, and that we can all contribute to this space in terms of suicide prevention. But let's just put it in the chat. I would like to see all those and also think about them, reflect on them as well going forward. So we'll go back to our presentation. So supporting the suicidal person, how do you support the suicidal person? The first thing is recognition, because you've got to know that somebody is potentially at risk before you can then help them. What are the things to look out for? I think mental health is really about, mental health occurs in three domains. It's in the domain of emotions, it's in the domain, domain of emotion in terms of feelings, domain of thinking, and domain of behavior. Those are the areas to look out, to look for mental health problems when we are looking for it. So in the same way, when you are looking for signs or warning signs that somebody might be suicidal, that's the place to go to. Changes in personality or behavior, anxiety, irritability, moodiness, agitation, feeling distant, for instance. Just, you can almost see that the person is there, but they are not there. And you can even pick that up sometimes in places like this, in maybe somebody's got their video on. You can really see that it's not just something that happens in a day. Maybe at work, you can see this person, this colleague who is constantly looking very lost or distant or preoccupied, and it's happening day after day. Rather than think, oh, it's not my business, maybe it's worth just asking them, are you okay? Because it may be a lifesaver. Social withdrawal, like increasing use of alcohol or substances, disruption of sleep, appetite, and energy. Sometimes people who are suicidal actually give us clues. They express hopelessness. They engage in final acts of sorting out their finances, writing a will. I'm just not saying that writing a will, it's a good thing to write a will as soon as one is an adult. However, if somebody begins to then pay more attention to that in a way, nothing has changed in their life. There hasn't been any transition. There hasn't been. They just, things are not going right, and they decide to write a will. It might actually be a warning sign. Or they start making plans to look after their pets, their properties. They start talking about the fact that they are trapped. They don't think they are going to be, there is any way out for them. They start talking about the fact that there are burdens on other people. People will be better off without me. When you hear those things, they're actually warning signs that all may not be well. all may not be well. And so it's important to bear those in mind. So what can we do if you then find out that maybe somebody is actually feeling suicidal or maybe in distress? What do you do? The Samaritans have got a very good way to approach that conversation of talking to somebody who's suicidal. They call it the shush method, which is to show care. People worry about the fact that I'm not a mental health professional, so I might not be able to engage in this conversation. But the reality is that I found out that level of conversation is one that you are not qualified on the basis of your professional qualification or the number of titles you have at the back of your name, but by the nature of the fact that you are a human being speaking to another human being. So it's not about really our professional qualifications or not, or lack of it, but about the fact that one human being is engaging with another human being on a very interested level, on a level in which I'm saying, I care really about you and I want to see what's going on in your world. Patience. It's going to take, if somebody is suicidal, it may not be the first conversation, but we need to hang in there. Or it might not be the first time we ask them. So having patience to hang in there, particularly follow your gut feeling. Sometimes you hear it, people say, oh yes, I felt something was not right. I really, but I wasn't bold enough to ask, or I thought I was prying, or I thought I was intruding. These days, I'll rather pry and intrude rather than then find out more later, maybe weeks, days, or months later, that really, if I'd asked for that, maybe I would have saved a life. So being patient, asking over and over again. One of the resources I'm going to share at the end of today is called the Are You Okay? R for rainbow, U for uniform, and OK is OK. It's an Australian website, a very large organization that are doing quite a great deal of work globally in terms of the information they are putting out for global audience. www.ruok.org.au. There are actually several video models on that website about how to engage in that type of conversation with somebody who is in mental distress. So have patience, use open questions. Use open questions. Don't make any assumptions. Don't be judgmental. Just please, I'm interested in knowing what's going on for you. Just be open. Don't use closed questions. Use very open questions that allow people to, how have you been? What's going on in your world at the moment? Let's mute ourselves, please, and say it back to them. Use their own words. So when somebody says something to you, use their own words back. Oh, yes, I'm feeling very distressed at the moment. I just feel trapped. Oh, do you feel trapped? So using their own words back to them means that you are not at risk of putting your own interpretation of meaning to it. And that helps them to keep the communication lines open. And then have courage. Sometimes you would have to hang in there. Sometimes it might not be the first conversation. Sometimes it will mean also going out of your way, stepping out of your comfort zone to break that barrier and ask in the first instance. Because the challenge is that a lot of people don't ask. People think, oh, I'm not qualified enough to ask. I don't feel close enough to ask. And we give ourselves 1,001 reasons why we shouldn't ask. When in actual sense, people who are suicidal are waiting to be asked. Anyone who is suicidal does not want to be in that state. Really, before somebody decides that death by making themselves die is the only option out of life, they must be in a very dire place. And so up till the last minute, they are hoping that there can be some solution. So this is something I put together in terms of just thinking about yourself in terms of what are the qualities I need to bring, what are the values I need to bring to the table when I'm engaging in this conversation. So firstly, authenticity. Don't worry about not being a mental professional. It's not about that. It's about an empathic conversation from one human being to the other. That's what's most important about it. You're thoughtful, you're interested, and you really genuinely care about that person. Be cautious about jumping into giving them advice, making hasty conclusions, or just be there to listen to their distress and let them know, I'm just here to listen, and without offering non-judgmental support. Confidentiality, letting them know that confidentiality, you are not about to put their news out there. However, I think it's also important to also bear in mind that the boundaries of confidentiality is that if somebody's life is at risk, they need to know that if their life is at risk, or they confide in you that somebody else's life is at risk in terms of, oh yeah, I'm going to take my life and I'm going to take the life of my boss, then I cannot keep that to myself. So it's about letting them know that this is a safe place. It's a place where you can confide. Distractions, dealing with the distractions ahead of time is important. People are not going to tell you the most intimate details of their life if there is 1,001 things going on in the background. So thinking ahead, particularly in an office environment, in a non-home environment, is something to think about. How do I create the space for them to make the safe space and without distraction? And then the exchange is about really what am I willing to give in terms of it's important to think about what you are willing to exchange in terms of your previous vulnerabilities or your current vulnerabilities. Exchange is very powerful in relationships and in building trust in relationships. It's very important that you give something in order to get something. So what am I willing to give emotionally to avoid? What vulnerability am I willing to share? And of course, being able to celebrate friendliness is about really expressing your gratitude for trust. So if somebody suddenly opens up, a work colleague, they suddenly start telling you that currently the marriage is going downhill, or that they are struggling to keep up with the pressure of juggling being a new parent with work and all that. It's important to actually celebrate that disclosure, to actually let them know that you appreciate that they've put you into a trusting space, and to keep that communication line open. And of course, to end that conversation as well by agreeing next steps, by agreeing how to check in with them, and how to move things forward, and to help them to think through options. What are they, not putting options in their minds, but helping them to think through the options. What have you done in the past that has helped? What can you do now? What's the next simple step? What's the next simple step that you can take towards resolving this situation? So being authentic, attentiveness, mutuality, reciprocity, being able to give and take, parity. Just very quickly, a while back, I had a situation in which I knew that a work colleague or somebody that I knew in a social setting had a situation that they were obviously distressed about. And I thought that it was in my place to be able to speak to them. And so I sent them a message and said, I really want to speak with you on a matter, but and in the real sense of it, the ideal thing would have been to come to your office to come and have this word with you, to come and chat with you. But I'm not going to do that because there will be distraction, because there are other people there, and this is a very private matter. So would you like for us to meet up? And so we agreed a place to meet up. And one of the things that I told them was, look, I celebrate you. I think you're doing a great job. I think that what's happening in your life currently has nothing to do with your competence or non-competence. It's a reflection of the broken system. And so wherever your journey takes you in the future, do be aware that there is a work colleague who thinks the world of you, who thinks that you have done the best you could do in this situation, and just know that from one human being to the other, there is somebody who's rooting for you. And of course, that I believe was quite powerful. I believe that it made quite a huge impact on them. It helps them to be able to raise up their heads and really be able to go on. Right. So those are questions to ask ourselves. Am I in a good headspace to even do that? Am I willing to listen genuinely? Am I prepared to open up, for them to open up? Because the reality is that sometimes people ask you, how are you? But really, do they really want to know? I mean, so some of the reason why sometimes people say automatically I'm okay or I'm not too bad or whatever people say back is because really they are thinking, can I trust you? Are you sure you really want to know? And I'm sure it's the same with you. Really, so the question is, do you really want to know? If you don't really want to know, then there's no point asking. So what I'm trying to say is we need to get ourselves into the place in which we are sure that we really want to know. Have you figured out a good time for them to be willing to have the chat that you want to have with them? Have you chosen somewhere private and comfortable? And like I said, www.rruk.org.au is a good website to actually go on and look at the different versions of how people have these conversations about are you okay and how they move things forward. So in terms of the workplace, and this is going talking about crafting a strategy by your organization now. 3 out of 5 employees, what's in it for you as an employer? And that includes whatever organization, whether it is a charity, whether it's a church, whether it's a corporate organization, whether it's a faith organization, what's in it for you as somebody who's in the helm of affairs or somebody who's an influencer? 3 out of 5 employees experience mental health issues because of work. Work is a very crucial place. And one of the things that we can do is I want to ask you, what's the atmosphere at your workplace like? What is the temperature in your workplace? Is it full of competition, conflict, and contention? And is it such that, and what are you doing to influence the atmosphere in that place? Because 3 out of 5, many times the people I see in my consultation are people who work plays a role in their distress, and that can tip them over. That's the cost of work-related mental problems. And also 70% of managers feel that there are barriers to providing support for the well-being of the people that they manage. So what can you do in your organization to change that narrative? What can you do to change that narrative in your organization? And so in terms of just bring practical ways of executing this, if you are going to really contribute to suicide prevention in your organization in terms of the workplace, it's got to be from strategic level, it's got to be from board level. As the board has got to commit to it, the movers and shakers of that organization, if it's the board of trustees of the charity, if it's the pastoral team of the church or the faith leaders in your organization or the board of directors, there's got to be a commitment to it from higher levels. Because if there is no commitment to it, it won't happen. So one of the tasks is that do you belong to that? Do you sit around that table? And if you don't, is there somebody who can be an ally in that table, on that table that you can use? And then there's got to be a policy in place, something that is written that is periodically reviewed, some sort of strategy. This is a commitment to the well-being of people here. And then a culture of support. And that's something we can all contribute to. A culture of support is something that we can all contribute to really make sure that we work in a place that is non-toxic. Mental champions, celebrating key mental health awareness days. For instance, May 14, Mental Health Awareness Day. What are we going to do? What are you going to do in your organization? Are you going to use that opportunity to have those conversations about mental well-being of your staff, of your colleagues, of the organization? Looking out for new joiners or people who are obviously struggling, people who are, very recently, I've been having quite a very busy, hyper busy schedule at work. A couple of weeks ago, one of my colleagues noticed that it was written all over me. I didn't realize she noticed. And she said, "Oh, yeah, it looks like you are really, we can tell that you have been stretched because we know such and such. We know there are a number of colleagues who are not around. And as clinical lead, you've got to make sure that the place is running well." And we can see that. But what was important, what was very interesting to me was that I didn't realize she had made such a note of it that she'd actually discussed, she'd actually express concern. And then during that day, on that particular day, another colleague saw me trying to have my lunch about 3:30 p.m. And they said, "Oh, wow, you mean you've been that busy?" And I said, "Yes, but it's fine. I'm having my lunch now anyway." And what then really touched me deeply was that at the end of the working day, one of these colleagues actually came downstairs to my office. It was way out of their route to come out of the building. So you could see they were intentional about it. They came, put their head through the door and just said, "We are really in your corner. We know that your hands are full at the moment and you are stretched, but we just want you to know we are thinking about you and that we recognize that." I mean, that was powerful to me. I stepped back and I thought, I'm really proud that I work here. I am really proud that I work in this team. That it is a place where people actually look out for each other, and without you saying it, people can actually see when things and we can create those cultures in wherever we are. We can create those cultures. And then, do you challenge bullying and discrimination? Do you challenge bullying and discrimination in your organization? And on that note, I'm sharing the resources that we've got. That's the International Association for Suicide Prevention. Samaritans, you can refer to this SHUSH, and they've also got quite a lot of materials on actually engaging in that type of conversation with somebody who's distressed or somebody who might be distressed. ruok.org.au is an Australian website, but also lots of videos on there. They've got a YouTube channel as well. CalmNet is Campaign Against Living Miserably, and it's actually for men. It's a chat. It's a website. It's a support group for men with mental difficulties, and they also run that's the chat number for people who want to engage with them from 5 p.m. till midnight. There is support after suicide.org.uk. That's for people who have been bereaved by suicide, because bereavement by suicide is a very peculiar one. And there are very difficult issues of grief, of guilt, of anger that people suffer from and suffer with. And those they actually help with that. And then Men Shared is also specifically for mental health of men. Papyrus is for young people. It's actually, there's an organization that actually helps young people to support mental well-being of young people, and that's their website as well. Next steps. So, like I said, these meetings run monthly. We also have a WhatsApp group where I put out information. I try to put out information regarding mental well-being and mental health. Ever so often. Usually I try to do it every day. It's not always the case, but that's something that we do. And we also have a YouTube channel with the link of it. I'll put that link out on the next slide. And the May hub is going to be on alcohol and substance misuse. And I've got a very eminent colleague who will be taking that. The dates are going to be out. The June one is going to be on personality. The April one, we are going to be dealing with depression. So please save those dates. And if this has impacted you in any way, please make some noise on social media. The handle is Tripod Care. So the handle to use, handle is not the word I'm looking for. I always forget this word, but never mind. Just the buzzword here is Tripod Care. And then the other things, some organizations, we can support you in writing things about your organization, in helping to put together also support for churches. Somebody's asked about churches. You can only organize mental health awareness days. You can support your young people. You can organize mentoring schemes for young people, young adults mentoring the people in teenagers. and the teenagers mentoring the people in primary school. You can do that. And then the adults mentoring the young adults. That's some of the things that church people can do. Yes, keyword. Yeah, thank you. So that's all about the things that people can do. And that applies to faith organizations as well, where you can actually put that in place to support the people under your care. So if you wanted to register for subsequent meetings, that's the website to go on to the Eventbrite link, Tripartite Care Hub. And those are the dates for your information and to, oh, thanks, Penny. And that's the WhatsApp, QR code. Hopefully you can click on that. So that's that. And that's me. That's my contact details. Please feel free to reach out. If today has been of any benefit to you, I'm keen to hear from you. What do you think? What are your thoughts? It's always good to. I do say that with all. I really want to hear from people. You can check the YouTube website, the YouTube Tripartite Care. Those are my Facebook details. Those are my LinkedIn details. I'm available on social media. Okay, right. Good. So at that point, I wonder whether there are any final questions or any final comments or anything anyone wants to write on the chat, or you can unmute yourself and say something. Okay, there are some questions in the chat. Okay, I'm going to do that, a quick dive. So let's see. Okay, I'm just looking through the questions now to see. Okay. Okay. Right. I'm just trying to see. Suicide prevention is everyone's business. Okay, suicide prevention is everyone's business. Collaborative approach. Loneliness can occur in presence of crowds. Being alone is not being lonely. Connection is key. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Dr. Shuro. Yes, loneliness can occur in the presence of crowds. So it's about an emotional connection, not just physical. Every expression of suicide should be taken seriously, no matter the number of times it is voiced or expressed. Substance misuse can increase the chance of completed suicide, especially alcohol. And yes, and if you want to hear more from the person who has made that comment, Dr. Ajayi is a very, I know you're probably thinking, do you all have psychiatrists in your family? But Dr. Ajayi is a very eminent addiction psychiatrist, and we are going to have him take the floor in May. He's going to be telling us about alcohol and substance misuse and how to support the people in our lives who might have those challenges. Suicide can be seen as a choice. Yes, thank you, Dr. Seth, for that. How can men with erectile dysfunction don't seek help and fall into depression leading to suicidal tendencies? How can the church help? I think it's about awareness. I think it's really about all the church taking on these things and letting us know that we have passed the stage in which all our responsibility towards the people that we lead is just more than it's more than them being in church, more than teaching them scriptures. It's also about their physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And that's scriptural as well. I wish above all things that you prosper and be in good health as your soul prospers. So it's about, yes. And I also encourage that person to seek help. It's not something to be shameful about. There are things in place. Okay, does exposure to family violence, including physical? Yes, yeah. Exposure to violence, particularly in the very early phase of life, there's what is called adverse childhood adversity. Adverse childhood experiences, they can make people prone to mental conditions later in life, and of course, would also then lead to, can also increase the risk of suicide. Dr. Ajayi has also said that, yes, in church, that yes, it's true that prayer works, but then we also, people should be encouraged to seek professional help. It should be a collaborative work. It shouldn't just be one thing at the expense of the other. Right. Oh, somebody wanted. Okay. Yeah, such a small thing, but great impact. Collaboration. Thank you for the presentation. Please, where we are close to an individual, but the mind is made up, how do we stop them? I think it's hanging in there. I think it's important to hang in there. I think it's important to support them I think it's important to create a safe, sensitive space where trust can be developed. Really, the reality is that it's very unlikely that somebody is really, really decided that suicide is the only way out. It's usually a case of they think it's the only way out. But if there are other solutions, they would embrace it if they feel it's available. Right. I didn't really get the video. My connection was really bad. Can I get the video link? Okay, let me see. If you go on the link, let's just see. I'm going to stop my share and see whether I can bring in that. I'm just going to see. I'm just going to put that link on the chat so that for the benefit of the person who. Okay, so that's the link. That's the link over there for you. Okay, I just want to be sure I haven't missed any comments. Thank you, Penny. Like I said last time, Penny is my medical education mentor. She was the one that introduced me to the world of medical education, for which I'm very grateful. Suicide prevention is everyone's business. Okay. I think that's about it. I'm aware that our time is fast spent. What I will do is, thankfully, as long as this is not a private chat, I will have it anyway. And if there's any question that hasn't been addressed, I would aim to address that in terms of contacting who has written the question and getting in touch with them. Yeah, thanks for the, okay, yeah. There's something about mental first aid. Yeah, mental first aid, I agree, yeah. That's helpful. And of course, if you're in an organization, Tripart Care can actually also deliver a full day course, half a day course to your members or to your corporation or to your organization. Really, that goes through it like a whistle stop tour. It could be a full day, it could be a half day, whatever meets the needs of those in the organization. Right, okay. I think that at this point, we are 3 minutes past 8:30. Once again, I would like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. It's been really a great pleasure and my privilege hosting this event. And I hope to see you again next time. That will be the last Thursday in April, which is the 28th of April. So please mark your diaries. It's the same time, 28th of April. And thank you very much for joining us. I now declare the meeting closed. Thank you once again. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Doctor. God bless you.
Thank 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 you.
God bless you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bless you too. Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Dr. Yodele.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Zolanka here.
Oh, thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
That was
Bye.
awesome.
Bye.
Really.
Bye.
Thank you and good night.
Good. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you so much. So this is what I've been missing.
Thank you, Dr. Ajayi.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Oluwapemi. It's good to have you here.
I'm waiting for my CPD points.
Right. We'll talk about that off camera.
Good evening. Thank you for the good lecture.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah. Cheers. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Jai.
Oh, thank you very much. Oh, thank you, Sis. It's good to see you.
You too. I'll be in touch.
All right, no worries. That's fine.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you.